Because it is my guilt, I claim you, grievous miracle. Make my chest hurt with regret.
Blasphemous was a game that really caught the eye when we highlighted it in a recent upcoming games video. A striking art style, scenes of intense combat, and a very intriguing story looked to form a very interesting and enticing package. Does it live up to the early promise? I'm Glenn for SwitchUp, thank you to Team 17 for this review copy, and now let's find out. Blasphemous tells a story of a world plagued by a deadly curse, a curse known only as the Miracle. You play as the penitent one, the sole survivor of a massacre known as the Silent Sorrow. Using the power of your sword, Mea Culpa, a sword born from guilt itself, you must free the world from its fate and discover the origin of your own anguish. The game describes itself as a non-linear hack-and-slash adventure game. What this essentially boils down to is a mixture of tropes from a few different genres having been fused together. It displays many of the elements of a metroidvania, and if you had to jump off the fence and put the game into a genre category, it would probably best fit in here. It has all of the key components, the aforementioned non-linearity, the save rooms, and the inaccessible areas that will open up as your character develops, to name a few. You will move from screen to screen. Each new screen you visit opens up a new area in your map, which is accessed by pressing minus, and unfortunately there is no way to see the map on your main play screen. Defeating enemies will earn you Tears of Atonement, which are your form of currency in the game and can be used in a number of ways, some of which we will cover as the review goes on. Your save rooms take the form of these shrines, and pressing X will see the penitent one kneel at the shrine, saving your progress and fully restoring your health. The consequence of doing this is that it will cause any defeated enemies to respawn. As you progress, you will also unlock lifts that will escort you from one area to another, as well as portals later on, allowing you to fast travel between places and easing the emphasis on backtracking. You will find prayers as you play, each with its own power, and you can choose which of these to equip from your inventory screen. Prayers are used with a press of the ZL button, and each one will consume some of your fervor meter. Fervor can be refilled by defeating enemies, or for a boost, you will sometimes have an opportunity to perform an execution. You do this by pressing the prompted button at the right time. Should you die, the penitent one's guilt will increase. This will cause your fervor bar to decrease in size, and you will earn less fervor and Tears of Atonement from defeated enemies, much like the Souls Vessel in Hollow Knight. There are two ways to rectify this. The first is to return to the point at which you died and remove the guilt fragment that has been created, or alternatively, you will find statues where you can atone for your guilt for a price, thus clearing your fervor bar of its afflictions and returning it to its original size. As well as the aforementioned prayers, you also have a rosary in your inventory and will find beads as you progress. You can choose which of these beads to equip to your rosary, with each one granting you a particular perk. There are a number of additional knots strewn across the game world, and finding these will increase the number of beads and therefore perks you can equip at once. There are 38 children to be found throughout the adventure, acting as a collectible of sorts. As well as these, there are collectible items, each with their own backstory and lore, which are all very interesting to read. Finally, there is a skill tree available to you, again accessible through your inventory, and you may spend your Tears of Atonement at Mea Culpa statues to acquire new combat techniques, and you will also find sword hearts that modify your sword's properties. However, for every buff they award, they will weaken you elsewhere, so it's a delicate balancing act. You will encounter certain characters as you go who will give you a quest to complete, usually followed by them bestowing an item upon you to aid you in said quest. However, the quest details are never written down anywhere. You do not have a quest log anywhere in your inventory. There is a page for quest items, but that's it. This felt like a bizarre oversight, as it made it difficult to remember who gave you certain quests, where they were located, and what it was they wanted you to do. A lot of the time, I just tried going towards empty parts of the map, hoping to trigger something or find an item, not always entirely sure what it was I was looking for. Not because the game didn't tell me, but just because I couldn't remember what had been said and had no way of checking. Sometimes I would walk past a person or an object that in the past had served just as background, to now find I could interact with it due to me having acquired a particular item, but this was more through luck than judgment. Combat is of the hack and slash nature, although you will not be able to just button mash your way through. Even from early on, enemies will look to defend themselves. Some will call for you to be patient and parry attacks, waiting for an opening, whereas others may need you to dash through them, evading an attack and giving you an opportunity to attack back in the process. Combat is tough, and even relatively early on, you can get a little overwhelmed as enemies are thrown at you from all angles. It does feel satisfying though, as you learn the ways and moves of each enemy type and become more confident in taking them down. There are no health pickups, however you do have health flasks that you can use to restore your health bar. You start with 2 and can acquire more as you go. They are used by pressing the L button and they will refill whenever you kneel at a shrine. I must say that there were times where certain enemies' attack patterns seemed a little disingenuous, or they would fly off screen and shoot you from there where you could not reach them. Another example is this enemy here that blends into the background and was a first timer's trap for me, killing me as I assumed it was another of the game's statues. Dying will see you return to the last shrine you kneeled at. Whilst you will not lose any of your progress in terms of items you picked up before your last death, you will of course have to backtrack to where you were. Blasphemous also plays like a platformer at times, with some very tricky platform sections included, and these were some of the poorer parts of the game in my opinion. The reason being that some of this platforming resulted in insta-death, and this does not translate very well in a game about exploration where it could be a while between save points. At one point I spent 15 minutes navigating crumbling platforms with an ever-changing wind direction whilst battling a multitude of different enemies, made it all the way to the next area but died before finding the save room and therefore had to do it all again. As I'm sure you can imagine, this was very frustrating. I did love the fluid nature of running and jumping through areas and taking on deadly enemies, but the lack of a minimap and absence of any proper direction at times was disappointing. It does a good job at representing the tough as nails metroidvania that has almost become a subgenre of its own, although it does not always execute it perfectly, and with elements of so many other genres represented, they do not always quite blend together. Too many cooks at least sour the broth at times, but thankfully never do enough to completely spoil it, and gameplay receives 15 out of 20. In a game that prides itself on its combat mechanics, controls need to be very tight, and for the most part they are. Your character is responsive when moving and jumping, and the game includes a ledge grab mechanic, like the old Prince of Persia games, and I always appreciate the inclusion of such a mechanic in a game. Pressing the R button whilst in combat will block, and you can parry an opponent's attack by blocking at the exact moment of impact, thereby enabling you to counter a weak attack or deflect a heavier attack. This is all about timing, and again, the controls do a good job with this. Dashing is activated by pressing ZR, and this also works well. Having the map assigned to the minus button is a little awkward, particularly as it's not viewable any other way. The minus button is not the easiest button to get to, what with its placement near the left stick, and whilst this isn't the game's fault, not displaying the map means having to use it much more often. Bizarrely, you also can't open the map when clinging to a wall, which seems like an odd oversight. Talking of the wall cling technique, you activate this by pressing Y when in close proximity to a particular surface. This sees you jam your sword into the surface and cling on, allowing you to then wall jump. Sometimes attempting to attack a flying enemy near these sections saw my character cling to the wall rather than attack, so I needed to bear this in mind when planning my positioning for these enemies. Timing of the controls takes some getting used to, but they are solid for the most part, and they receive 14 out of 20. Blasphemous uses a pixel art style, and quite simply, it looks stunning. It reminds me a little of a couple of other Switch games in Slain Back from Hell and Dead Cells, both in terms of its character animations and its backgrounds. Talking of the backgrounds, they are amazing. There are multiple layers of parallax scrolling included for both the foreground and far into the distance. When in motion, it really is a sight to behold. If I were being ultra critical, it's a shame that all of these layers are quite static. It would have really elevated things to a whole new level had there been a murder of crows flying in the distance or fog creeping in. If you look at a game like Kingdom 2 Crowns, which has a very similar art style on first glance, the rippling of the water as it cascades past was the icing on a delightful looking cake. Blasphemous is so close to this standard, and a little extra background animation would have taken it there. Character animations are good, with little details such as the masochist enemy whipping himself when standing idly are a nice touch, and the visuals are by far the best part of the game. Unfortunately, there were occasional frame rate drops, noticeable in the character's run animation at times, and slowdown occurred once or twice, generally when using a prayer whilst there were a lot of enemies on screen. Audio wise, the music is a bit of a mixed bag. On the one hand, some of the tunes absolutely nail the melancholic tone that the harsh environment and hopeless task at hand really call for, whilst at other times the music sounds quite upbeat. Whilst not bad music, it felt completely at odds with what the game was conveying. The voice acting also leaves a little to be desired. Whilst strong at times, at others it sounded like something you would have heard in an FMV cutscene in an adventure game of spurious quality on the PC. Visuals are an absolute delight, marred ever so slightly by the occasional slowdown, and receive 19 out of 20, whereas audio is all over the place tonally, albeit the music itself viewed in a vacuum isn't bad, and therefore scores 14 out of 20. Blasphemous costs £19.99, €24.99 or $24.99 and is a fair-sized adventure. There's a lot to explore, with a story that is certainly interesting and visuals that really have had some love poured into them. The difficulty level is high, almost from the word go, so be aware of this. If this is exactly what you are looking for though, you will be in your element, and value scores 15 out of 20. To conclude, there is an awful lot to admire about Blasphemous. It gives you a lot of choice in how you build your character, with a host of upgrades, equipable items and a skill tree. Its pixel art style is stunning, and its story is certainly interesting, evoking thought of classic literature such as the Divine Comedy. On the flip side though, there are a few quality of life features missing, and sometimes it pulling from so many different genres results in slightly muddled gameplay, and to be honest, a patch could quite easily solve some of these. If you are a fan of Hollow Knight-esque metroidvanias, then this is a solid acquisition. It just doesn't quite pull off its gameplay tropes with the same finesse at times. Blasphemous gets a SwitchUp score of 77%. Many thanks all of you as always for watching. I hope you liked this video. Please do remember to leave a like if you did. A quick thank you to our Patreons for your continued support, and to each and every one of you for watching our videos. Take care, and until next time, happy gaming.